I'm going to let you know a little bit about my background so that you think about the kinds of people you want to put on your team to help you develop your project, and particularly the great broader impacts portion of that. I spent 12 years as a teacher in middle school and high school. So I come from a K-12 background of having been in classrooms, albeit my classrooms were gymnasiums and swimming pools and that sort of thing, but still. So I understand the school structure and the teacher mentality a bit. I spent, after graduate school, I spent 8 years on the faculty in teacher education. So the preparation of teachers and how people transition from students to teachers and some of the factors and processes involved there is another part of my experience. I've spent a total of 12 years in RISE, the Research Institute for Studies in Education, as a person helping faculty try to acquire grants to do budgeting and write proposals and so on, and quite a few of those years as an evaluator for funded projects. I've also conducted my own grant-funded research projects as well. So when you're thinking about what you need to augment your team, try to think about the skills you have and the ones you need. A very wise department chair of mine once said, if we're all alike here at the table, then we're all redundant. What you need is, you need the people who have the expertise you don't. You need people who are different to help you broaden your perspective and to fill in the gaps so that collectively you have the skills necessary to carry out your project. And I'll leave it at that and go on.
Thank you. As I said, I'm Gene Lutz from University of Northern Iowa, and I direct our Center for Social and Behavioral Research, which is not focused on K-12 or STEM or any such topical area, but rather a general, broad-based center doing all kinds of activities, including program evaluations. I'm a sociologist. I'm still a scientist, though, let's be clear. And I'm a sociologist from Iowa State. So I understand the divisions between the different parts of the university and some of those barriers between the different units. And so I grew up in a culture, you know, academically, that was part of that kind of a discussion continuously about, you know, are the social sciences sciences and all that kind of thing. My experience has been that there is so much commonality here that that's a really false argument that goes on when you get right down to doing the work. Now, so while at UNI we have this research center doing evaluation projects, and it's of all sorts, some of which indeed are STEM and K-12. So we have projects that we're looking at math and science issues in terms of the learning that occurs with the students, or with recruitment of science teachers, how that turns out with various kinds of various kinds of programs. Technology infusion, how that contributes or not to advancement of math and science in schools. You probably know about the Governor's STEM Council that's now about a year old, and we are the evaluators for that project with collaboration here with RISE and with CEA at University of Iowa. Then there are other kinds of projects too that are tangential, you know, like violence prevention projects, all kinds of public health interventions and whatnot. So we have a lot of experience across a lot of areas. One thing I'd like to say is that a big part of the NSF push, I guess, is this thing called broader impacts, which you've heard plenty about. And one of the main features of it is collaboration. We are taking that to the level of the evaluation as well. So as I mentioned on the Governor's STEM Council, we are using that as a way to build an inter-university infrastructure between us, RISE, and the Center for Evaluation at University of Iowa. And we're doing that the same thing, exactly parallel with the NSF EPSCoR project that's centered here at Iowa State. So that has a rollout here, if you will, in terms of you thinking about a project. We're interested in collaborating outside of you and I. We're interested both because we think it's a healthy thing to do for us and potentially for you, but it helps to build this infrastructure about a much more, a broader, deeper kind of evaluation resource in the state that can support all kinds of activities. Sometimes you're asked to have an external evaluator. Well, that's where our collaboration could really help, where we can trade projects, if you will, and have the roles and still be working together, but working collaboratively. So that's a kind of a semi-practical message I have.
Thank you. So my name is Adah, and I'm here from Iowa State University, and my role is not as an evaluator. I run and direct a number of broader impact programs here at Iowa State. One is through the Center for Biorenewable Chemicals, and I also am quite involved with the plant genome group of faculty who have brought in a lot of funding with broader impacts that are focusing on K-12. And so what I'm bringing to this discussion is the other side, not the evaluator side. And I really wanted to underscore some of the things that Nancy said, because she gave a tremendous amount of knowledge and also bullet points of things that PIs and evaluators need to be aware of. And I just wanted to underscore a few things that I have learned in the last few years. She talked about participatory and empowerment assessment. And so if you are a PI working in a STEM area and don't really know what exactly you want to do with your broader impacts, but you come up with an idea, for example, you want to do something about the curriculum that it supports your area of research. It is so important to really find out whether that's necessary. So having some sort of a needs assessment, it doesn't have to be a whole full-scale survey needs assessment, but a discussion with the people who would be stakeholders and involved with your broader impact ideas. That would be a very important conversation to have before you even go any further. Another thing that Nancy said is that if your science in your research proposal to NSF isn't up to snuff, nothing's going to help. But that doesn't mean that your broader impacts shouldn't be up to snuff as well. So as an example, when our Engineering Research Center for Biorenewable Chemicals was up for a decision, there were 8 that came to the final round, and they could only fund 5. So basically, those 8 that made it out of, I don't know, hundreds of applications, proposals, those 8, obviously their science was totally up to snuff. And so the review team had to seriously think, well, okay, all of them would be great centers, but we can only fund 5 of them. Let's look at their broader impacts. And we were told that. We were told up front that that's what would happen. So if your broader impacts aren't right up there, as well explained and planned and everything as your research program, then you really don't have a chance, because as you all know, the funding is going down. There isn't that much funding, and so everyone that makes it to the last cut is really good in terms of their research, their scientific research. So it's their broader impacts that might actually make the final decision. Another item that was discussed was your budget. If you don't include in your budget something relating to your broader impacts, you just don't come across as being committed. So even if you're an individual PI and you are talking about a budget of 100,000 maybe, or something in that scale that isn't large, it's not in the million scale if you were thinking about a center. Even if you're on a small budget, it's really important to put in something in your budget that shows that you are committing some of your money to broader impacts. And then finally, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was impact. Nancy talked about, you know, how are your broader impacts or your ideas for the greater good of the community going to actually have an impact? And that is truly, I think, from what I'm hearing back from NSF, is where it all comes down to. You know, what is the impact? And what I'm hearing is that workforce development is the impact of this next few years. What are we doing to help young people think about their careers and help them engage in a more STEM-related workforce? And so there are so many ways in your broader impacts that you can bring this about. You know, as long as you can show that what it is you're doing in some way does relate to that big impact of workforce development. So those are my views.
My name is Connie Hargrave. I'm a faculty member in the School of Education here at Iowa State. And I direct a program called Science Bound. Science Bound is Iowa State's premier program and the only program in the state of Iowa designed specifically to prepare ethnic minority students for STEM careers. We work with students starting in, we identify them in 7th grade, work with them 8th through 12th grade for sure, potentially all the way through their baccalaureate degree here at the university. So in terms of broader impacts, I'm going to come at it from a different perspective than my colleagues on the panel. One of the ways that I think a program like Science Bound may be beneficial for the broader impacts efforts of your work would be to, we already have a program established and there are plenty of opportunities for you to plug in and have an impact. So for example, what we're concerned about is the STEM education trajectory of students. We work with nearly 400 students in 20 schools and 3 school districts. We work with 50 teachers. So there are opportunities for you to be involved with our students. We bring them to campus. So you may do tours of your lab, some demonstrations with small groups of students. There are opportunities for you to visit our schools. Science Bound operates like an after-school program. And so there's opportunities, as was stated by Nancy, where it's out of the regular school experience. And so opportunities for you to have small group interaction or large group interactions with Science Bound students, particularly ethnic minority students who have a propensity for math and science and an interest in STEM. It's already been identified. So in terms of having a broader impact, those you can provide some critical experiences, all the way to research experiences where they get to very consistent with NSF's effort for them to participate, peripheral participation in communities of practice. And so, for example, we've collaborated with CBERC and Adah's work, where our students have participated in 6-week summer research experiences in between their junior and senior year of high school, some in between their sophomore and junior year, and then they have participated some at the REU level as well. So one of the advantages of participating with a program like Science Bound is that it can be mutually beneficial. We provide a context with which you don't have to formulate a structure. We already have a structure, and we have a fairly flexible structure, so if there's some ideas that you have, I can help plug you in with specific schools, specific ages of kids, kids with certain interests, rural environment, urban environment. So that's one of the advantages, and consistent with the assessment, then we also conduct some of the assessment. We could collaborate with you on that. And so as you're looking at broader impacts, we can carry that broader impact for you, because you may do something with them for a summer or a one-time experience, but I'm watching, we're monitoring their engagement and the impact of the participation with your activities on a longer term basis.
Before we turn over to questions, let's leave the microphone on. Just a follow-up question. The moderator will take advantage of that position. Connie is the program that you described for reaching that audience. There's a well-worn path to your door. People want to go with those kids. How do you, and let's talk about the consumer end of the broader impact, how do you decide what's a worthy project that you engage in or one that you're going to pass on? So as people perform their work, what is it you look for a good project to partner with?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, it needs to be mutually beneficial. And so a lot of times we'll sit down, and before you have a big project idea, before you're writing the NSF proposal, you might come and speak with us, and maybe when we have our kids here on a Saturday, you'll take 10 students, they'll come to your laboratory and you'll do an activity with them, and we assess that. And then we get a feel for, is this a fit for the kinds of things, are our students the kinds of students that you want to work with? So that's one of the things. And one of the things, like I said, we have nearly 400 students. Those experiences don't all happen in groups of 400. They happen anywhere from one student to groups of 40, groups of 50. But largely, they're 10 students, 7 students. So smaller experiences. And so we try to be fairly flexible, because with 400 individuals, they have a variety of interests. And so part of it is I want to know you, I meaning our science-bound staff, we need to know you, you need to know us, so that we can make that connection. Generally speaking, if you contact me 2 weeks before your proposal, thank you for thinking of us. We appreciate that. I have some kids coming to campus in 2 months. How about if you do an activity? I'm probably not going to be the one to collaborate with at that point. But I want to build a long-term relationship. Your research does not occur in a 6-week period. It's a long, extended project. We need to establish that, because if we're going to have those broader impacts, it's an extended process. So generally, we kind of come to know each other. Adah and I have worked together for a number of years and have built that. So it's kind of dependent on what you want to do and how we can see a fit in the range of things that our young people are doing and are interested in, and also what our needs are. And also, there's lots of opportunities for teacher development as well. Again, going back to what are their interests, what are their needs, what's going to fit with what they're doing. So I don't think of Science-Bound as a one-stop shop, but there's a plethora of opportunities, because there's a little informal school built for young people who are headed towards STEM areas in a critical area, even in Iowa. When we think, oh, Iowa is primarily white, yes, we know that. 9% of the population of Iowa is not white, but nearly 20% of the student population. And so that's a significant critical mass. And what we don't know is, part of what's happening is we don't know how to prepare scientists. The literature is not clear. We can't say, oh, no problem. You got a 7th grader who is interested in biology. This is how we groom them up the STEM pipeline. We don't know that. So part of it's mutual research. We need to learn that. We need to learn that particularly for ethnic minority students.
We'll just keep passing. Okay. Connie mentions a really important point, is one of the largest challenges of wanting to do outreach is building outreach relationships, right? They just aren't automatically there. You have to build them, and they can take a very long period of time, sometimes 5 to 10 years to build a really strong relationship. So don't start from scratch. Work with Connie or work with others on campus. The reason to have you introduce yourselves to each other. The largest youth development program on campus is 4-H, and these folks over here represent 4-H. And so if in fact you don't know how to go about building a partnership, you have an idea, you're trying to think about how do you reach young people, Extension and Outreach can probably help you do that. Another challenge that I've found that comes from this is trying to figure out what your unit of analysis is going to be. Are you going to measure at the individual child level? Are you going to measure at the classroom or the out-of-school experience level? Are you going to measure at the school level? And you have to get really comfortable with thinking about what do you want to do? What makes the best sense? And if it's something that's not comfortable for you at all, but you know you need to do it, find someone to help you do that. So. That was your point?
That pretty much was what I was going to say. Well, the other thing that goes along with that is that, as Connie said, she has 400 students, but they don't work in 400s, and schools are like that as well. Individual teachers have classrooms, particularly elementary teachers, have a sequestered little group that they relate to on a day-to-day basis, and working at that unit level may be appropriate. But if you're talking about physics or you're talking about biology at the secondary level, you may only have one teacher, but kids come and go throughout that. And so thinking about whether you want to take on the entire science curriculum, or one course, or one little module or unit within that, think about that scale, and then think about the fact that that classroom occurs within an existing bounded system. There are curriculum requirements already from the state. There are standards from the professional content areas. There are testing rules and regulations that the teachers are bound by. There are administrators who are or are not in favor of change and being innovative and so on. But think about a bounded system. And so trying to find, as Connie mentioned, that fit with your project and an appropriate level or unit that you can work with, and then establish that relationship before you start writing. There's the hardest thing for all of us as program leaders, as evaluators and so on, is to find out in 48 hours we need an evaluation plan, and can we stick you into this and make it work? Usually we can't make it work. A lot of times we will try to give you something, but we can't give you quality in that short amount of time, nor can you get entree to these other worlds in a very short amount of time as well.
Since Jay put me on the spot here, I do want to clarify. We certainly can't do everything. We can do a lot of things. And part of having that conversation early on, why don't we have some kids come to your lab and you do a demonstration, have your graduate students or undergraduates involved, and that's a positive experience. And then let's you and I sit down and have a conversation. I've worked with lots of researchers who then, at the end, hey, we need a 3-week, you know what, we've already talked about 6 ideas. We've already got 6 ideas that we've outlined that we could do. We could have students come do, be undergraduate research assistants in your lab. We could have them do REUs. We could have high school students doing research. We could do many projects along those lines. We could have some of your undergraduates come to the classroom. They could do a 3-week curriculum unit that's built on, come to the science-bound after-school program, so we could do a multiple-week build-on of what you did on a Saturday with kids. So there's all kinds of ways that we can design things that will fit the needs of our students and fit your needs as well. Part of what I see my job is helping you translate cultures. Okay, I understand your lab, great, a little bit of what you do. I know I've been around Iowa State University, I used to work at Ames Laboratory. I know the research community and the culture here, very familiar with that. I also get kids and school systems and maturity and how they develop, and sometimes when they're horsing around and they're not paying attention, you're not used to that kind of environment. So part of the translation that I'm comfortable with and that I see programs like ScienceBound and others of us helping to do is, okay, I understand that. I'll get the kids ready to effectively engage in your environment. I'll help you when you come to the schools to transfer and translate in this environment. And so I think that that's really important, because part of the broader impact that you can show is you're helping them become a part of enculturation into the STEM community, which is a significant impact to have.
Questions for panel? And panel, if you can repeat the question to the camera, whoever has the mic.
One of the other main reasons that even if evaluation isn't your thing, that it's important to do is whatever you get as results from your assessment from your current grant efforts helps you get your next grant. Has anybody noticed that? Yeah. So you have to be thinking when you put together what you're going to measure, what your long-term agenda is. So if your short-term agenda is working, you know, with Connie in these 3 communities, but you have in your mind a scale up to be Iowa-wide or 12 states or whatever, what kind of data do you need to collect from that first effort in order to feed that into what the next grant proposals are going to be?
It's great because it's what a lot of people think about when they are thinking about how to do broader impacts, because it's easy, it relates to their research, and how do I take my research topic and boil it down to something that a high school kid might be interested in. It's in their physics class. And actually, from what I've seen, NSF likes that. NSF likes faculty to do things with curriculum. However, the other side of that is your participant, the teacher or the school district or whoever's going to use that curriculum. And they are the ones that really need to buy into this, because they're going to be the ones that work with it. So if you're even beginning to think about webinars or curricular development or anything like that, before you even get busy doing any of that, I would really recommend you engage with either the Department of Education, if that's a too big a thing for you to start working with, then with a local high school teacher who might be able to come in on board and work with you on that, or someone in central Iowa. The local area education agency, Heartland, their science consultant would be able to help you make contact with that sort of person. And the other thing with the curriculum is, Jay and I were talking before, is that your curriculum could also be used in an after-school program, and in that case you're not so, it's not as prescribed, because you're not having to worry about the Iowa core curriculum or whether a teacher can fit that curriculum into their already very full schedule. And so, you know, 4-H would be a place to be talking about curriculum development for after-school programs. And then, of course, how do you evaluate that is something you would worry about only after you've actually thought about what it is you wanted to.
Yeah, I'll just add one piece. The interesting thing is, and I've been one that taught high school for a long time, and my audience is high school ag teachers, because I was one of them for a long time. And so everybody comes to me and says, you've got access to all high school ag teachers in the state, so we want to put you on this project. And I'm a young faculty member, say, absolutely, let's do it. And then the project comes out, and I have absolutely no idea what it morphed into. And now we're trying to do everything completely opposite of what was told us today, is develop that evaluation as you go. And so now we're trying to figure out how to do some of these things after the fact. So kind of interesting, I guess.
I've had that happen frequently in my life. I call it backfilling, where all the things you hope you should have done. So like faculty will come to me, 6 months before they need tenure, help me write my dossier, and they haven't kept any notes. So you're lucky in that you've got those teachers, but you also have FFA. So you can do the citizen science version of NSF using FFA, and you may want to try to think about how you might combine those pieces, because it's that non-formal that may allow you, where you don't have the rigor built in from the beginning, that you could go and try their citizen science part of that. The other thing is, I'd be glad to sit down with you or your student and try to map out a logic model to help you think through, okay, even though we're down that road, where are we going and what should we really focus on right now?
Some of those comments made me think of a point I wanted to make here, and that is, it's a tricky business, I think, to marry your passion with someone else's interest. And you can't get too in love with your passion and forget the other part, because they're the ones who are going to pay. Now, my context is UNI, which is not a research university, so I see this a lot. People who have passion, they have smarts, but they're not plugged into funding sources, and it's not going to go anywhere. I don't care how passionate and how smart they are. It's just not going to. It's not going to happen at any sort of major, impactful level that's publishable and so on. I mean, it's just not. Now, you probably don't have nearly the same proportion of that at Iowa State or Iowa or any research university, but nonetheless, I see it even with people who are plugged in and suddenly they get interested in something, but it's not fundable because it's not part of some funding program. So you not only have to see that in a general way, but in a very specific way of saying, well, sometimes it's masked in terms like leveraging and, cooperation and all this and that. You're going to have to give, The people with the money, they determine what gets funded. And so they have an agenda. And you need to find a way to put your interest with theirs and get on with it.
You mentioned that you're working with graduate students, and I want to make sure that people realize what a great resource those graduate students can be. Graduate students need research experiences. They need theses, dissertations. They come with, very up-to-date theoretical knowledge, immediate experience with contemporary thought and so on in various fields. And so enlisting graduate student skills and backgrounds in projects is a good way to get things done at a price where you cannot afford Max Shelley. I guarantee you cannot afford much of Max Shelley. You saw him this morning and the breadth of knowledge and experience he has. He's a very expensive commodity. You get your money's worth. I guarantee you get your money's worth, but he's an expensive commodity. But don't overlook, as Nancy mentioned, youth participants as evaluators and so on. We have a wealth of graduate students here who can add to that too. And to be able to pick out one feature of your curriculum and have someone do an independent study where they test it with individuals, collect assessment data. There are a lot of ways you can design short-term, small-scale, rather inexpensive project to start doing some of that evaluation. Once you start, then, as Nancy has said before, your first results feed the next ones and so on.
And it really helps if you get a graduate student who wants to turn your research into their research. So, yeah, bingo. There was another question about PhD students related broader impact. Did anybody here write that question? It was under the, I don't know, it was just here. If you had a question you'd like discussed, it said PhD students related broader impact. No? No one here?
In your experiences in doing work with different grants or projects, what are the impacts that granting organizations are really looking for right now? We had some solutions in workforce development earlier. What are some things we want to think about for targeting? Does that make sense?
Well, I think it's what I heard this morning and what I've heard this afternoon. It's no new answer to that. I mean, it is about impacts, as I understand it, as I see it, I mean, the process part is interesting and necessary even to look at. I mean, we want to know what causes, not causes, but what leads, what's associated to with impacts. But it is about impacts, and in this case, it's about, in all kinds of ways, the pipeline, as it's put, either getting people into it or keeping them into it or enticing them, supporting them as they go through it. It is about economic development, and it's kind of the contemporary Sputnik problem as to go back quite a ways. That there's a fear of losing global competition and all that sort of thing. Now the other side of that is my I'm all for that. But I'm also interested, when I look at it, about those young people who are not interested in science, and that we're not pushing them off to some secondary class. That we aren't in a war with the arts and that sort of thing. That there's nothing to be gained by that. And in the long run, I'm interested in kids growing up to be adults who are broad themselves. Not narrow in their perspective, whether that be in a science area or in any other sort of respect. So that's perhaps my private issue as I'm going along with that. I don't see a whole lot of discussion about it, but I think it can be a potential barrier to some success with some programs if you're not sensitive to that kind of thing.
There's kind of a second area I am seeing, but it's tied to workforce development in the way it's really more tied to economics, is the whole thing of the health sciences. And we're really seeing, how do we decrease healthcare costs? How do we decrease reliance on human services? How do we decrease juvenile crime? And that is all, even though it's health, connected back to the tax dollars. And so I've even heard the governor say, if we were the healthiest state in the nation and we could reduce our health care costs by this amount, it would free, 8-point-some million, billion, whatever dollars for economic development. And so the idea is you only have so much money and you want it to go over here, but you currently have it over here. So how do we use something about health sciences or other sciences to get at that part of the equation, not just workforce development? And of course it depends on the particular grant program and what they're saying the boundaries of science are. But it doesn't mean you can't include some kinds of things in there. So you've got a program about, whether it's the plant genome, where is there something in there about creating something that's going to reduce, people's screen time, or, whatever it might be that helps people have physical activity. So be thinking about that extra second sexy piece that people are talking about in the health sciences.
I have a question for scientists, or maybe for everyone. So what was that one activity that made you a scientist or an evaluator? What was the one? Was it the NSF-funded person who came and gave a presentation in your class? Was it the summer camp that had a bunch of science activities in it? That was it. Oh my God. We did the water, the water quality experience, and that was what. It was Neil Armstrong. He came to your class, spoke with you. He was your mentor. Part of the reason that I asked that is because a lot of times we look for oh my God, it was the magic bullet. That was it. When I spoke to the students, and we need to remember that it's a collection of experiences over time that have that broader impact. And that's one of the things that in ScienceBound we can help you with, because we can also provide you information about the experiences that they've had, but then also looking more deeply at maybe their extended experience with you and how that had an impact on their trajectory. It wasn't, with the exception of Jim here, an aggregated experience. No, it was your personal relationship with.
Imaginary.
Two factors for me: mentoring, money. I didn't have the money to go to school, but I had mentors who were able to help me get money. So don't underestimate the economic development piece of it from the individual student. And I think this is, Connie's program has shown that economic opportunity is a big part of Science Bound as well. So think of those two things as real important.
The other important point that Connie brings up is that if you're not trained in how to do scope and sequence of educational programs in outreach contexts, then you need some help from folks in the School of Education or in 4-H Youth Development. Because most of us take a shotgun approach, right? Okay, I can get this from NSF and do this. I can do this with NIH. I can do this with internal grant on campus. And it's a shotgun approach. You're lucky if the buckshot hits everything. And so how can you have a line of inquiry or a vision that you're following that you can have all of the grants lead into that give you that scope and sequence and depth that you need in order to make that difference? Not just, we'll do this camp, we'll do this whatever. And that can be hard to do.
So you're with construction, civil engineering, and environmental engineering?
Yes.
Okay. So NSF thought about this a while ago. How do we create scientists and engineers who can actually speak to the greater community, in particular people in government, so that they can better understand the needs of STEM to solve, all the big issues that need to be addressed. And they came up with a program called K-12. And K-12 was a program funded by NSF. And we got a grant from NSF for a K-12 program at Iowa State. And that K-12 program is called SYMBI, S-Y-M-B-I. We are in our 3rd year. And all your graduate students were invited to apply for K-12 fellowship. And the objective of this fellowship is, number one, to train graduate students to better communicate their research. And we haven't had any applicants from civil engineering. Anyway, yes. So the problem is that, unfortunately, NSF has cut the program. We have 2 more years after this year of funding, and we are finding, well, we, as in RISE, who is evaluating it, and here is an example. We have a graduate student who is doing most of the bulk of the research, Stephanie, over there, hiding in the corner. Unfortunately, we didn't meet Stephanie when she was thinking about what she wanted to do as her research, because I'm sure we could have talked her into doing this for her dissertation. But we are finding that the graduate students are really learning how to become better communicators, both of their research and of science and engineering in general. And we have another evaluation of this through the English department, where we have a graduate student who we have videotaped our fellows before they go into the classroom, giving a 10-minute presentation of their research to an audience. And then at the end of the fellowship, they give another 10-minute presentation of their audience, of their research to another audience. We videotape them both, and this graduate student has a rubric and is comparing the 2 presentations before and after the treatment of being in the classroom. And Stephanie's observations and our survey observations and all of our evaluation of this program here at Iowa State in the last 2 years has shown that it is a very important program in the training of graduate students to enhance their communication skills. And We are now talking about how we can institutionalize that effort at Iowa State. We haven't spoken to Diane Rover, but that is the plan through SP at Iowa State and in collaboration with some of the school districts in Iowa, because we have to partner with school districts in order for this to happen. So stay tuned and encourage your students to apply for the program.
Adah, could you share on just some of the successful performance in the program, in the summer work, to help them in their communication skills besides being in the classroom?
Well, first of all, the fellows are paid a hefty amount of money to spend one full day every week in a classroom, and they work in the Des Moines schools, in middle school or high school. So they are spending a full day, not as a teacher, not as a teacher's aide, but as a resident scientist or engineer in the classroom. They get 1 week training with the faculty from the School of Education on the pedagogy of middle school and high school science. They also got some training from Stephanie and from, we didn't get Connie on board unfortunately, but there isn't a big issue about how do you walk into a classroom that is not something you may feel comfortable. It's not the way your middle school classroom looked maybe. It's much more diverse, and so we need to train our graduate students how to communicate with all types of students, whether they're slow learners, whether they have learning disabilities, whether they come from different cultures, whether they don't speak English or English is their second language. So all of those things together with the pedagogy of teaching science in a classroom. So they got a week training in that, and of course a week is nothing, but it's something. And then they had a 2-week training in collaboration with their partner teacher on campus, where they worked together with faculty from the school from the Department of English, who do communication and science communication. That's what they do. They worked with Jay on how to think about the big pictures of how do you take the small things that you do in, like forces in motion. You know, it's a big unit in a science classroom in middle school. Well, how do you take forces in motion and make it relevant to the students in the big scheme of things? So they got training on that. They got training on how do you bring more math into the classroom. And some of our fellows are amazing how they help the teacher actually see areas where you can bring more math into the class. So all of those have really helped, all of those sort of training programs have really helped the fellows strengthen their ability to communicate. I don't know, Jay, if you want to add anything to that.
I get my class.
I was just going to comment on the communication in general, and maybe this is a slightly not the answer you're looking for. But I think that as part of the broader impacts, all the broader impacts generally are aimed at the science community having a broader impact on the broader community, on the rest of everybody else. And maybe we need to think about that a little bit. Maybe part of the broader impacts is entering scientists, researchers, entering into and having a broader impact, and the rest of the community having a broader impact on them as well. And so as part of that, in terms of the communication, one of the things so we do a lot of things with our students in Science Bound to facilitate their communications. They're giving formal presentations from 8th grade every year. They're required to, and then there's a paper that they have to write, and they're giving presentations in front of collective groups. And then obviously when they get into REU experiences, they're producing posters and mini papers along it. So we're working to pay attention to their ability to communicate. Also, by having different researchers and graduate students involved with sharing their work with our students in the laboratories, they have to practice their communication skills, because our students aren't ready to understand the technical accuracy, the technical details of research, but they have to have they're seeking to gain a conceptual understanding of the work and the significance of the work. And so those are opportunities for graduate students to practice communicating what it is, their technical expertise, to, in essence, part of the general public, as well as opportunities to speak with not just students, but also we facilitate opportunities to speak with parents. And so then there's also, that's a little bit more of the general public.
One other opportunity that might help facilitate some of this relationship building is looking at internal grants on campus. I know within the College of Human Sciences where we are, we have collaborative seed grants, early researcher grants. And most of those are designed to help facilitate partnerships and build collaboration across departments within our college and some outside the college. So if you are interested in partnering with someone, for example, from engineering to communications, or from mathematics pedagogy to engineering or something, there are frequently opportunities on campus here to start a small project, to get to know each other, get something started, and then, as Nancy said, you leverage those results into your next big grant. And those projects that have the potential to attract external funding are, of course, the most valued from the perspective of the seed grants and so on. So you might think about starting small and meeting new friends on campus as a way to get started on your broader impacts that you're not ready to really jump right into yet.
Well, as we wind down in time, any final comments from the panel? I did just percolated from our conversation. Now time to let them spew out.
I'll say one thing on behalf of teachers. Teachers get a lot of really bad press. They get blamed for everything in the country. You know, it's always, if it's not the teacher's fault, it's the mother. You know, that's really what it comes down to. So I would like to urge you to think about teachers as both limited by their environment, the schools themselves. They are limited by what they can do and the massive amount that's required of them in those schools. But underneath there beats a heart of a person who really cares about their students, about the subject matter, about the success of the school and the students. So if you approach them with that collegial, professional, let's learn together kind of approach, you will have an audience who really does want to collaborate because they really, really care and they want to do their best. So give them a chance, get to know them, treat them with respect, and they'll work their tails off for you. So, yeah.
Spot on.
Well, just some closing comments then. Just as I listened to the panel, one of the things that's, I think, very consistent in all their comments was the idea of collaboration and building those partnerships early on. You know, there's nothing more frustrating than have researchers show up with a week before the proposal's due and say, well, we need these broader impacts. Stick it on the end there, will you? And I think Connie really framed it very well with, you know, we'll start the conversation, we'll see where that mutual benefit comes in, and we'll build from there. And then thinking about what are the things that are really going to be beneficial for society, and working together to make those come about, and then how to measure those and tell our story. And really, at Iowa State University, I often think about if we could have a consistent set of measures, metrics that we talk about, that by contact from Iowa State University to a youth life, this is what's going to happen. And we can start to think about some consistent measures. And you know, career aspiration is one that we talk a lot about. Do we have an impact on their career? But then along with that, behaviors, do they live better lives, the health aspect of that. And then communication, you know, as we finished up the conversation with the communication, I will share from Adah's group, had one of the fellows came in with his original PowerPoint, gave his presentation on his research, and most of the audience was the RCA dog. It was clueless. And his exit presentation, he made the presentation with absolutely no textual content. It was all pictographic, and it was brilliant. And he made so much. He could barely communicate with his colleagues. He was very introverted and turned into, you know, he really grasped the concept, and it was very encouraging. And another fellow in one of the exit interviews was talking about going in. He goes, "Yeah, the first day I learned that you don't want to bring in a complicated PowerPoint into a 7th grade classroom." So, you know, so when we're collaborating, we have to understand our audience and how to best communicate those. So, well, let's thank our panel and Nancy for her talk.